The Galactic Civilization series has been going on since before I was even born, and with the 4th game set to release today, there's no better time than now to get into the series. With that in mind, let's get started with my complete beginner's guide to Galactic Civilizations 4. As always, chapters are in the description if you want to jump around, and a huge thanks to Stardock for sponsoring this video. Of course, like any good strategy game before you get to playing, you first have to do a spot of game setup. Now, if you want to jump straight into gameplay, you can choose Quick Start, and this will start the game with default settings for beginners, but for everyone else, let's change some settings. Now, don't worry, it's not super complicated, so we can actually speed through it. The first thing you're going to have to do is pick your civilization, and there are plenty to choose from, all the way from the Human-Terran Alliance to the adorable Mimo Brotherhood. Each civ has special abilities, a cultural focus, biological type, and citizen modifiers. Special abilities are things the civ is good at, such as extended movement range for ships, cost reductions, and starting with more ships. The cultural focus dictates what culture the civ will initially be drawn to, which I'll explain as we go. The biological type dictates what conditions the civ requires to thrive and grow, and citizen modifiers can be any number of things such as planetary habitability modifiers or a focus on one kind of production. You can also choose to create your own civ, and this allows you to choose just the combination of aspects that you really want to create exactly the civ that you want to play. You really can customize every single detail of your own civ down to uploading your own images and choosing your own background music. The creation process is fairly straightforward. There's a lot of options to add lore and flavor to your civ, but since that's all optional, I'll focus on the things that actually affect gameplay. Your biology dictates what your population requires to grow and sometimes what kind of planets they can survive on. I just mentioned cultural affinity and I will explain it later since it makes a lot more sense to see in action, but basically this will be the primary way of thinking for your civ. Behaviours are how the civ will act when controlled by the AI. I don't believe these have any effect on when you play them, since you can do whatever you want when you're playing as them. Onto the abilities tab, and from here you can assign civ abilities. You can choose from a variety of options, and as I just mentioned, this will dictate exactly what your civ will be best at. Their civilization traits will do a similar job, but here you can make your own civ worse in some areas to gain points to spend in others, allowing you to really fine tune what the civ will be good at. You can choose what species your citizens will be, and each option has a set of modifiers as explained earlier. So again, choose whichever works best for your build. And lastly, on this page, you can choose your set of command ships. These are special ships unlocked over the course of the game, and each is good at a certain job, so just choose the set which makes the most sense for whatever your civ goals are. The final tab is fleets, and this is all cosmetic, so just choose whatever you like. There isn't really a wrong way to do all of this creation process, since you can make whatever you want, so just go wild and have some fun with it. As usual with these sorts of games, the standard humans are probably your best bet when getting started. They start with extra ships, which will help you get to grips with, well, how to use ships, shockingly enough. As well as this, they're fairly neutral, so can befriend or target whoever they want fairly easily. After selecting them, you can optionally customize them, but we're going to leave everything on default for now. Next, we have the game settings. You can customize a ton of things here, from how skilled the AI opponents will be, to the size and density of your galaxy. But again, I would leave everything on default for your first game, since it starts you on ease of a fairly small map, which is ideal when getting started. Also be aware when playing large maps, they can have more of an impact on performance, so proceed with caution if you're on a loaded machine. In the Advanced Settings tab, you can toggle a number of features and victory conditions, and everything here is pretty self-explanatory once you get to grips of the game, so we'll ignore it all for our first game and leave everything as is. Finally, on the last screen, you can choose your opponents and their difficulty settings. You can throw whoever you want in or leave it up to random chance. Whatever you do, just make sure to leave them all on easy whilst you're getting started, since they can and will wipe you out if you aren't careful. With all of that out of the way, we can finally start the game and get playing. Upon loading in, as long as you followed my advice for game settings, you should start with a planet and a couple of ships. We're also going to take note of the UI, since a lot of your time will be spent searching around for the right menu or resource, but I promise it'll all make sense in no time. Speaking of UI, let's start with that, since it'll be more or less the same no matter what. In the top left, you have whatever your active research project is and all of your resources. You'll start off with just a few, but over time more resources will show up as you unlock and discover more in the galaxy. Credits are your main currency, and they are spent on all kinds of things like leader purchases, trade deals, and much more, and they are gained through more trading, planetary production, and more. Control is kind of like mana, in the sense that it allows you to use special abilities or force effects onto your own civilization to maintain control. Makes sense of a name like that. It's gained through keeping planets under control, so a little bit of a speculate to accumulate type of currency. Food is used by organic pops to survive and grow on planets, and is created by farmers, also on planets. Finally, modules are used to upgrade star bases and can be created in shipyards, and yes, I will come back to shipyards later. Everything else that you unlock here can be earned either through planets or mining stations, and will be spent on more specific projects, so for the most part, These are the only ones you actually need to manage and keep in the green. Over in the top right, you have the choice of 5 tabs. By default, you'll have your advisors, and when getting started, these are a great help since they'll nudge you in the right direction for what you should be doing, whether that's building more military ships or colonizing more planets. So if you're ever stuck for something to do, check here. The summary tab will give you a brief rundown of your civ, like planets under their control, total population, their rank in each of the 6 categories, and once you discover them, your power compared to others. The planets tab, of course, shows you all planets you control and all their production and main stats. Planets will be separated into core worlds, colonies, and uncolonized planets. Uncolonized explains itself. As for the other two, core worlds are worlds of a high class and act as bases which nearby colony planets ship their production to. This allows you to maintain control of a large amount of planets whilst only needing to directly build up a few of them. The fleets tab shows you all ships in your civ and any fleets that you've created. And lastly, shipyards, star bases show you all these shipyards and star bases. Shocker, I know. The bottom left changes depending on what you have selected, so we'll leave that for now. The middle bottom is always the same and has a range of buttons, most of which will be grayed out to start off with. On the civilization button, you can fine tune your tax rate to raise and lower your income whilst also affecting approval, so find a balance that keeps you in the green and your population happy. On the right side of this screen, you have your policies. Slots and policies are unlocked via research, and each grants your civ bonuses to one area of the game, usually at the cost of another, so allow you to fine tune the focus of your civ towards whatever you like. The leaders tab is where you can see all the leaders in your civ and recruit more if you need at the cost of credits. Each of them comes with proficiencies in 4 skills, and these will affect how effective they are in certain roles. Leaders also come with a loyalty stat which determines how likely they are to stick with your empire. This starts at a base level and can be affected over the course of the game by certain events. The bottom line is make sure you have it as high as possible for everyone to maintain control of your civ. Leaders perform a number of jobs in game. You can assign them to be ministers, where their stats will dictate how powerful these civ-wide effects are. As soon as you can afford to, fill these positions as the buffs and bonuses are incredibly useful, so you want them active for as much of the game as possible. You can assign them to govern planets where their stats will boost certain outputs depending on the planet. You can assign them to be diplomats where their social skill will dictate how effective they are performing whatever tasks you assign them to with that other empire, normally raising relations. You can assign them to command your command ships, enhancing their HP and attack stats, and finally you can assign them to work with different factions in your civ to gain favour with said factions and enhance your civ powers in a number of ways. Each faction will come with their set of bonuses for your civ, and these can be enhanced with certain leader skills. So make sure to check out which they prefer before assigning to get the most out of them. In the cultural progression tab, you can spend culture points to develop different ideologies in your civ. Choices which have a high affinity in your civ will have discounted prices, allowing you to develop them more easily, and this can be affected by your choice when creating your empire and certain events in game. Culture points are earned by your empire's capital, and the amount can be modified via events and special planetary improvements. Each tree offers a number of choices, with each granting your empire a range of different effects depending on the tree, making them better at specific aspects of the game. I know all that sounds incredibly vague, but these effects really can vary just that much. Nihilism, for example, has a lot of options to increase income at the cost of increased crime, whereas progressivism is all about tech and research. It's best to stick with your larger discounts to start off with to make sure your culture lines up with your goals to fully optimize your game. Plus, you want to make the most of that big fat discount. Executive orders are those special abilities that use control, which I mentioned earlier. You can unlock more of these as the game goes on, and they can provide you a large variety of effects to your empire, from revealing part of the map to a boost of income. Just make sure you've read all the effects before you activate them, as some come with some pretty costly side effects. The data bank is pretty much a stats page where you can see how your empire compares to others over the course of the game. It doesn't really do anything for gameplay aside from possibly show you areas where you need to focus on to keep up with others. Galactic challenges are related to the Prestige Victory condition, so I'll cover that much later in the How to Win section. From the Diplomacy tab, you'll be able to interact with any other civs you've discovered and conduct trade deals and other diplomatic pacts and actions, but I'll cover all of this in the Diplomacy section of the video. Next we have the Vault. Over the course of the game, you can come across a large number of artifacts as a result of events and surveying anomalies. When found, you often have a choice of storing the item for later use or selling it in exchange for credits and other resources. If you choose to keep it, it'll appear here where you can see what effects it grants and choose to use it. There is a whole range of items and effects, so be sure to check out each one you unlock and don't hesitate to use them if it'll get you ahead. And lastly, the Galactic Bazaar. This is where you can choose to buy and sell pretty much every raw resource in the game. This can be useful if you desperately need something for construction or simply need a cash injection. Now we've finally got through all the UI, we can get into how to actually play the game. The start of the game is probably the most important part of any game, since that early rush for resources and territory can set you up for success or get you stuck in a circle of failure. The first thing I like to do is use the Telescope Takeover executive order to reveal part of the map, normally aiming for a nearby star where other planets are likely to be. This saves me having to use my other ships to explore that area and can possibly reveal planets worth taking over. Next, you'll want to give orders to each of your ships, and assuming you're playing as the Terrans, you'll have a few. But if not, just give orders to whichever you have. For the colony ship, I'm either colonizing the nearest planet, which gives me the best production, in my case that is Mars, or if my initial scan revealed a high class planet, I'll go for that to set up a second core world before anyone else can get their mitts on it. Planets like that are gobbled up in seconds, so if you spot one, get your ass over there as soon as possible. There is an auto-colonize button, but I'd advise against using this, as it can be pretty confused and take a far more dangerous route than it should, which you never want. Moving on to the probe, you can either set it to auto-explore, where it'll move around the map revealing everything it can, or choose a particular path for it to follow. The second option is better, so you have more control and can send it to nearby stars in search of more planets, but later on auto-explore works just fine to reveal the rest of the map. And lastly, we have our flagship, and with this, I'm just going to set it on survey mode. This will send it off to search for anomalies in the galaxy and survey them, which can trigger all kinds of effects and bonuses, so is well worth doing while it has nothing much else to do. Plus, it works as an auto-explore as it moves around learning what it can. Once all ships have orders, we just need to pick a research, and we can choose from the candidates suggested in the middle of the screen, which will also have recommendations from your advisors, or choose one yourself from the list on the right. Just bear in mind that texts in the middle get a large bonus to their progress, so it will get you through the tree that much faster. You'll also want to give orders to your shipyard. Instead of costing currency to build ships, you instead rely on the military production of the host planet, and the higher it is, the faster ships are built. Some good builds start off with are more colonization ships like 2 to 4, which seems like a lot, but early expansion really is just that important. Throw a couple of constructors in there after 2 or so colony ships, which will come in useful once you have a couple of tech projects online, so it's good to be prepared. Your starting planet should be all good with something queued up for the first turn, so you should be able to just hit end turn and get playing. Honestly, everything we did on turn 1, we're going to repeat for pretty much the entire game. Of course, if ships have longer routes, then you don't need to tell them to keep doing the same thing every turn, but you want to check on how everything is doing, make sure everything is doing something, and progressing your civ towards victory. No doubt, as you uncover more of the galaxy, you'll come across more and more planets, so let's go through which ones to prioritize and how exactly to build them up. I briefly touched on this when talking about colony ships, but every planet has a class and base output level. This output is simply how many resources your empire gains for owning that planet at all. The class dictates how many tiles are available for development on that tile, and planets with less than 10 cannot be built on. Now, this doesn't mean that they're useless, quite the opposite. You can still colonize these planets, and all they'll do is send their production to the nearest high-class colonized planet, also known as a core world. The longer the distance between the two, the less resources actually make it to their target, so try to keep things close to make sure planets are actually worth the colonization ship. If you find a planet above 10 class, aim to colonize it as soon as possible, as they can be pretty rare and allow you to really make the most of their planet's resources and those of any nearby. Once colonized, you'll need to assign a governor to these core worlds to start collecting resources from nearby planets and building tile improvements. If you don't assign a governor, the planet will act like any other low-class planet and ship its raw resources to the nearest core world, but this is a drastic waste of potential, so avoid doing this if at all possible. Clicking on any planet will show you some compressed stats in the bottom left. There may also be certain actions such as rushing construction on the right of the image. And the plus signs at the bottom allow you to build a variety of orbital buildings to improve planets in a number of ways. Double clicking on a core world or clicking the manage button will take you to the planet interface, and here you are more or less barraged with information. Over on the left you have info about the planet, like its governor, levels of pollution and crime, numbers of available citizens, and planetary input and output. Governors are assigned to core worlds and allow you to control planets. Pollution increases as you build more districts, which produce it in higher levels, reduce planet growth and food production. Crime reduces the income of planets, and high crime rates create more criminals, which can lead to a cascading series of crimes, so it's good to stamp out early. Approval is how happy your citizens are with life and is affected by a large number of things, but the main ones you can control are tax, ideology, and crime. Planetary defense is how hard the planet is to invade, and this can be increased with planet improvements both on the surface and in orbit. Your citizens provide all kinds of effects to your planets and can be sent to colonization ships to colonize new planets. Planet input are the raw resources available on planets and act as their baseline production. Output is the total amount produced when you add on the input of any buildings and modifiers on planets. As for the resources, manufacturing affects planetary improvements and ship construction speed. Research, income, and food are all pretty self-explanatory, and influence expands the borders of control around your planet, and if borders stretch out far enough and push into enemy territory, influence dictates how quickly you may be able to flip planets to your control, so having lots of influence is never a bad thing. Influence can also be expanded via space stations. There are 3 kinds: military, communications, and mining. Each of them pretty much does what it says in the tin. Military can fire on nearby enemy ships, and requires quite a lot of firepower to take down. Communications expands your influence a lot further, and you can also build certain labs, which can make the most of nearby research anomalies. And finally, mining stations, which allow you to harvest nearby rare resources. All 3 increase your influence in different ways and amounts. Back to planets. In the middle, you can see all the tiles available on your planet. Clicking any of these will show you the district options you can build, and depending on the features of that and surrounding tiles, certain districts can gain bonuses to increase their production. Of course, try to build districts where they'll gain the most bonuses to maximize output. Lastly, on the right you can see your shipyard, or build one if one hasn't been created yet, and you can see improvements you can build on the planet. These come in all shapes and sizes and can be placed anywhere to increase production of nearby tiles. Below this you have district upgrades to increase the output of your existing districts. Finally, below this you have available projects, and these are ways to occupy your planets to create resources such as income instead of building, and can be useful if planets get full or you just really need an injection of certain types of resources. Some good projects to queue up initially are the capital city improvement, since it produces a lot of different resources and improves everything built nearby, or manufacturing districts, since you want to build up everything as fast as you can early on, and this will set you up for success later. Honestly, there is rarely a wrong thing to build on planets, since they all progress you in some way. Unlike other games where specialization is the way to go, if you ask me, it's totally viable to make all of your planets all-rounders, since in the end they all contribute to the same thing. And optimizations from orbital buildings just add extra output rather than modifying anything on that planet via percentages. The main thing to focus on is making the most of tiles and improvements, so try to make the most of each tile rather than worrying about the planet having a main focus. If you do this with every high-class world you find, while sending resources from nearby low-class worlds, then you should be onto a blooming civilization in no time. As you continue to explore the galaxy, eventually you'll come across other galactic civilizations. You could even meet up to 4 of them. Once this happens, you'll need to learn to communicate if you want to avoid being called names behind your back. One of the early game tech options is the Universal Translator, and once researched, this will allow you to communicate with other alien civilizations and unlock the Galactic Bazaar. Once the tech is completed, you can initiate diplomacy with any other civ you've met and take a number of actions. Heading to the Diplomacy tab, from here you'll be able to select a civ to interact with from the menu on the right. Once selected, you'll get some details about that civ abilities and culture on the left hand side and have the option of assigning a diplomat. Doing so will increase your relations with that civ over time, as well as generate diplomatic capital, which is a currency which can be spent during trade deals. Speaking of trade, at the bottom left, you can click the trade button to open up a deal builder. From here you can add items on each side of a deal to build up a proposal, which can then be sent to other civs in the hope of striking a deal. This can be anything from currencies to technologies and even ships, so if you need something, maybe see if you can get a hold of it from any friendly civs. Just make sure you're not giving away too much and will come out worse off than you went in. Alongside the standard accept and reject, you can also choose to persuade or threaten the target. This will give the deal an increased chance of being accepted, but persuasion has a cooldown and threatening harms relations, so only use them when you absolutely need to. The other option in the bottom left is to speak to them, and from here you can take a number of dialogue options. Trade proposals takes you to the trade menu, as before, kind of makes you wonder why it's there. Threatening to destroy the faction will result in war. The something else in mind option basically just lists more actions. Proclaiming friendship increases relations with that target but causes their enemies to dislike you. You can ask them to remove ships from your territory, but this may harm relations. You can ask them for monthly credits, but this is unlikely to succeed if you have low relations, and you can offer them monthly credits to increase relations. As you can see, everything is fairly straightforward diplomacy-wise. Wars can be declared pretty unceremoniously, and alliances pretty much occur over time as relations improve with other civs. As the game goes on, events will pop up with all kinds of dilemmas, and a lot of these will affect your relations with other civs, so it's always worth reading each option to see if you can get on side with your friends even more or piss off your enemies. If war is on the horizon, then you're going to need some fleets, and for those fleets, you're going to need ships. So let's get to how to build both so you're ready for battle. Right, let's start with fleets since they are pretty straightforward. So let's say you have 2 ships, move them onto the same tile, and if they stack up with a little number 2 below them, then boom, that's a fleet. If they don't do this, then there should be a menu in the bottom left, which you can click to open up this menu. Shift click all the ships you want to be in a fleet, hit the create fleet button to, well, create a fleet. The size of fleets varies as the game goes on, so don't be afraid to make multiple to start off with before combining them later once you have the extra capacity. Honestly, that's really all there is to fleets. Those ships will now move around in a group, exploring and attacking whatever you set their sights on. If you're not bothered for shipbuilding, then just grab a mixture of the default ships of the best tier you can afford, while still mixing in a few small ships to keep yourself agile, and you'll be fine to take on most foes. Shipbuilding is where it gets a little bit more complex. When you unlock different tiers of ships, some default designs will appear in your shipyards, with a few options for different damage types and scenarios. For the most part, these will do just fine, so if you're not that bothered for min-maxing, then you can just use a mix of these and you'll do great. However, if you really want to get into the details, you can design your own ships. From the shipyard menu, hit the new design button in the bottom right. From here, you'll need to pick a ship to design, and you can build anything from a probe to your top-of-the-line military ships. Once you've selected a type, you're met with this screen where you can see ship parts on the left and ship stats on the right. You can now simply pick whichever parts you want by double-clicking them from the menu on the left, and you have 4 categories. Weapons is obviously how ships deal damage, and in Galactic Civilizations 4 there are 3 damage types: beam, missile, and kinetic. Each one has different ranges in combat and firing rates, so taking a mix is definitely the way to go, especially as you come up against different kinds of enemy units. Defenses can be things such as armor, as well as weapon jammers and evasion computers. Drives determine the ship's movement range per turn, and special kind of covers a range of parts normally for specialized purposes like colonizing planets, transporting goods, or surveying anomalies. Occasionally you can find something in here that's useful for combat, but most of the time it's non-combat effects, so I'd give it a quick scan and then ignore it most of the time. All parts you place on a ship must fit in the equipment manifest capacity, which basically means the total mass that the ship can support. So, how exactly should you build ships? Honestly, I don't believe there is a wrong way to do it as long as you have the best gear that you can afford and the ship has a good balance of damage and defense. Also be aware that adding higher tier components increases the construction requirements of the ship, aka how long it will take to be built. So if you don't have speedy constructions, there's no use building a ship that will take years to even be made. And of course, all this goes for all ships, not just combat, so if you want to get some better thrusters on your probes or make your freight ships a little tankier, you can do just that. So now you have all of your ships sorted out, let's get to actually fighting. Once you're at war with another civ, you'll be able to attack their ships, planets, and just about anything else that they own. Combat in this game is pretty straightforward. You take the biggest, baddest fleet you have and right click on an enemy fleet or space station, and once they arrive, combat will be initiated. It's all automated, so you don't need to go into a battle and instead are told the predicted results of combat, and are given the choice to watch it play out or just auto-resolve. Since it's all automated anyway, I prefer to go auto-resolve to save some time, but if you want to see some cool space fights, then go right ahead. Once combat is completed, casualties are dealt to each side, and once all ships are wiped out on one side, that fleet is destroyed completely. Planets are a little bit different and require specific ships with conquest weaponry. This allows them to lay siege to enemy planets and wear down their defenses until the planet is able to be forcefully taken over. Now, whilst conquest ships are strong versus planets, they are terrible versus other ships, so be sure to give them an escort to ensure they can reach their destination and perform their job without a hitch. Outside of just flying into an enemy, you can also attack from a distance if you're using ships with enough weapon range. This does a little bit of damage and is only really useful for softening up targets before getting into proper combat to take them out for good. Nevertheless, if you have the option to lose a barrage before combat, then by all means do it. Who doesn't love free damage? Of course, all wars must end eventually, and you of course have two options. You can either broker a peace deal, or wipe out the enemy completely, taking over all their planets and wiping them from the galaxy. Outside of just winning wars, on the grander scheme of things, how do you win the game? Obviously, if you end up going to war with everyone and take out all of the civs, then you win the game. But we also have a few options other than pure conquest. The choice that you'll notice most often is prestige victory. This is achieved upon reaching 100% of the prestige requirements, and this is done through pretty much everything you do. All your military, tech, manufacturing, and more is tallied up and added to your prestige, and upon reaching 1000, you will win the game. You can also complete galactic challenges to increase this by a large amount at once, and these can come in all shapes and sizes, from taking out specific non-player enemies to building certain planetary wonders. If you're going for this victory type, then checking out which of these challenges you can get on with quickly is absolutely the way to go. Just make sure you don't fall behind with the rest of the game in pursuit of a single objective. And if no one reaches the max, then when you reach the turn limit, whoever is the closest will instead get the win. We also have the influence victory, where 75% of the map is covered with your influence for 10 turns. The diplomatic victory is kind of like conquest, but with friends. If all major empires are in alliance together, then they collectively choose to win the game. And I believe that is just about everything you need to know to get started in Galactic Civilizations 4. If you have any questions about the game, then drop them down in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and if you want more space strategy gaming content, then why not also check out my beginner's guide for Stellaris, although warning, it's like an hour long.